Moses instructed the people in the wilderness to take the best olives and grind them up and bring that pure oil to the tabernacle, where there would be a flame always lit, always alight. And the priests would tend it to keep it going, and it would be placed in the menorah. Current practice is to have a light over the Ark of the Covenant in the synagogues and temples of modern time Jews. I am drawn to the imagery of light and darkness because I hear so much unhappiness and discontent and sense that these variants are never going to end, and we can't do this and we can't do that. And I think it's Pennington's words to us this morning, written back from when he was sitting in a cold prison in wintertime with only water, seeing the darkness that he was feeling, was able to write those words of comfort. Our theme, our yearly meeting theme, I just think is spot on, that we sing and rejoice because we know that God is at work in this thick night of darkness that can be felt. For those of us who are Christian, the light of the world that constantly shines for us is Christ. So we have the light of Torah for Jews and the light of Christ for Christians. Neither of these lights goes out. Neither of these lights gets old and out of date and not useful because they're of the divine. So last Sunday, we got ourselves introduced to John, the Gospel of John. And I had shared with us as a reminder that John is not like the synoptics. It's very, very different. That John has organized his texts around what he calls signs or miracles, deeds that Jesus does. And there are 7 of these in his gospel story. And there is usually a I am statement that accompanies that story or that deed, not a story, but the deed that he does, as a sign, as an indicator to us that Jesus is who he says he is. And the one I want to look at this morning then is found in chapter 9. And the story we're going to look at is in chapter 9 of John, which is one of my favorite stories of John. And this is where Jesus heals the man born blind from birth. Now, think about the contrasts here. The contrast of light and dark is used to illustrate the good versus evil, this constant, ongoing struggle, cosmic struggle of all of the universe. When God, from the very beginning, creates light, the first thing God creates out of the darkness, out of the chaos, and the end time stories, the apocalypses are all about good and evil and good overcoming evil. So if we think about that and we think about Jesus as the new Moses, the new Isaiah, that predict Isaiah, who talks about a suffering servant who's going to come and teach us about God. And we see that in what Jesus often will quote from Isaiah. And so when Jesus says, I am, then we have what I called last Sunday the big reveal. And in this case, it's I am the light of the world. In contrast to darkness, all of the dark things you can think about. I am the light, this constant light of God. This imagery then comes, as I said, from Isaiah, And if you were to look at Isaiah 42, verses 6 and 7, I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison, for those who sit in darkness. So that imagery of bringing people out of the darkness, bringing us into the light, bringing us so we can see, those metaphors of seeing and being blind, of hearing or being deaf, all of those contrasts, that's duality. And you see that a lot in John. And so you can be brought out of the darkness. But the other imagery that I find extremely powerful is the light will come into my darkness, into your darkness, into your prison. It doesn't matter how dark it is. As Pennington talks about what's going on in the world, all that stuff going on in the world, because the light can get through that and come to me, come to you, and be there and sustain us if we will but pay attention to it. These I am statements are really very powerful in this tradition because God is the only one who says I am. The prophet will tell us that God has said this, or God in the burning bush says I am. But when Jesus says I am, then he is emphatically using that language on purpose to say, I am God. I am the light of the world. So this, you can see why people got upset about this sort of thing, that nobody talks like this. And Jesus says, but I am the Son of God. I am God incarnate. I am the eternal word that was there in the beginning. And we see that in the beginning of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Jesus says, this is who I am. Jesus says, I am sent by God. I'm the heavenly emissary, as it is. I'm the visitor, the ambassador, bringing you news. That's why I can say I am. And he says, I am the Son who speaks and acts in unity with the Father. You see me, you know God. So Christ plays out this cosmic contrast and conflict between good and evil, light and darkness, blindness and sight. So let's look at this story in John 9, this gospel story, and listen for some of these things that I've been pointing us to. Jesus has just left the temple, so he's somewhere outside the temple in Jerusalem, the city. And as he passed by, he saw someone who had been blind from his birth. Rabbi asked his followers, who was it that sinned, this one or his parents, that he was born blind? Remember, when there's something, quote unquote, wrong with you, it's because of sin. So that's the first thing that people are thinking. Well, what did he do wrong? Was it him? Was it his parents that caused him to be born blind? So listen to this answer that Jesus gives. Neither the person nor the parents, replied Jesus, but he was born blind so that the work of God should be made plain in him. We must do the work of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So immediately you have, sin is just set aside. This is about seeing and not seeing, metaphorically, light and darkness. The man who can't see is living in darkness, okay? Saying this, Jesus spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he said, and wash your eyes in the bath of Salome, a word which means messenger. So he went and washed his eyes and returned able to see. His neighbors and those who had formerly known him by sight as a beggar exclaimed, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Yes, some said it is, while others said, "No, but he is like him." And the man himself said, "I am he." There's the I am. Not spoken the way Jesus does, but he's saying, it's me, kids, it's me. So immediately there's controversy about this seeing and not seeing. What's Jesus up to? What is going on here? Well, how did you get your sight then? They asked. The man whom they called Jesus, he answered, made the clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, "Go to Siloam and wash your eyes." So I went and washed my eyes and gained my sight. I don't know about you, but I think it's time for a party, a party of celebration and praise, and let's quit arguing about all this stuff. Oh, that's not what happens. Where is he? The crowd asked. I don't know, came the answer. So they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees. Now, when we think about our own religious questions or our what's going on here questions or how could this be, it's not unusual to go to an authority of some kind. I mean, students run to the internet and find the answers right there on their first pass, you know, and some of us get out our big thick books and some of us go sit under a tree and go to our massage therapist or something like that and try to figure out what's going on. Well, then it makes sense that these folks, good practicing Jews, would go to the experts, the Pharisees. We have another complication. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and gave him his sight. So the Pharisees also questioned the man as to how he had gained his sight. He put clay on my eyes, he answered, and I washed them, and I can see. The man cannot be from God, said some of the Pharisees, for he does not keep the Sabbath. So immediately we're looking at the rules, aren't we? This whole wonderful thing that has happened. We're distracted now, but we never did it that way, or that didn't work before, or whatever it might be. He can't be God because he's not obeying the Sabbath. We all know that God gave us the Sabbath, so we've been distracted. How is it possible, others said, for a bad man to give signs like this? In other words, if Jesus is a bad guy and he's breaking all the laws, well, how can he give sight to somebody then? So you've got this, I think, very human argument going on that really has not a whole lot to do with the miracle that's just happened. So there was the difference of opinion among the crowd, and they again questioned the man. What do you say about yourself? For him, what do you yourself say about him? For it is to you that he has given sight. The man says, he is a prophet. The Judeans, however, refused to believe that he had been blind and had gained his sight until they had called his parents and questioned them. Is this your son, they asked, who you say was born blind? If so, how is it that he can now see? We know this is our son, answered the parents, and we know that he was born blind. But how it is that he can see now, we do not know. Nor do we know who it was that gave him his sight. Ask him. He is old enough. He will tell you about himself. Can we receive statements from people that we haven't experienced ourselves or that we find confusing or unbelievable as their experience? This I know experientially. It's what we're trying to say. This happened to me. I wish you would believe me. You've asked me 3 times, how did this happen? And now you've asked my parents. His parents spoke this way. Ask him, and he'll tell you, because they were afraid of the Judeans, for the Judeans had already agreed that if anyone acknowledges Jesus as the anointed one, he should be expelled from their synagogues. So the parents are afraid they're going to get kicked out of church if they testify that the reason their son can see is because of what Jesus has done. That should sound familiar too to some of us, as we see people say things that get them kicked out of church. It's hard to testify when you're worried about nobody's going to believe me, or there's going to be repercussions, and yet this man sticks to his story, his light story. That's why his parents said he's old enough to ask him. So once again, they call the man back and say to him, give God the praise. We know that this is a bad man. So they're saying to the fellow who's had his eyesight given to him for the first time, don't talk about Jesus, talk about God. God can do these things, but not this man Jesus. I know nothing about his being a bad man, he replied. One thing I do know, that although I was blind, now I can see. What did he do to you, they asked. How did he give you your sight? I told you just now, he answered, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Surely you also do not want to become his followers. You are his follower, they retorted scornfully, but we are followers of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this one, we don't know where he comes from. Well, the man replied, this is very strange. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he has given me my sight. We know that God never listens to bad people, but when a person is God-fearing and does God's will, God listens to her. Since the world began, such a thing was never heard of as anyone giving sight to a person born blind. If this man had not been from God, he could not have done anything at all. You, they retorted, were born totally depraved. And are you trying to teach us? Remember, if he's born blind, it's either his fault or his parents' fault. Jesus heard of their having put him out, and when he had found the man, he asked, do you trust in the child of humanity? Tell me who it is, sir, he replied, so that I may believe in him. Not only have you seen him, said Jesus, but it is he who is now speaking to you. Then, sir, I do trust, said the man, bowing to the ground before him. And Jesus added, it was to judge that I came into this world, in order that those who cannot see should see, and that those who could see should become blind. Hearing this, some of the Pharisees who were with him said, then are we blind too? If you had been born blind, replied Jesus, you would have had no sin to answer for. But as it is, you say, we can see, and so your sin remains. This contention, this, you could even call it a contest between light and darkness, blindness and seeing, is what is being emphasized in this story. And every time I read this story, I'm impacted by what seems so obvious, gets all quibbled about and all discussed and all going off in different directions. And tell us again, tell us why we didn't believe you. Well, why should I tell you again? You didn't believe me the first 2 times I told you. That is so discouraging. I think this is a story that illustrates how not to encourage someone in their faith. Sing and rejoice, ye children of the day and of the light, for the Lord is at work in this thick night of darkness which can be felt. All of the Gospels portray Jesus as seeing himself as the one who delivers his people from bondage. Where do we turn to answer the question of how can this be? Is this right? Open my eyes that I may see visions of truth thou hast for me. Place in my hand the wonderful key that will unlock and set me free. Silently now I wait for thee. Ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. Amen, friends. Go in peace.